Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about what I had to do to get my Driveshaft installed in the E38 LSx Swap, and so I'll just dive right into it. Uh, First things first, this is a pretty hard part about the swap because the Driveshaft kind of dictates the location of the transmission and engine, but also the engine and transmission dictate the location of the driveshaft. You'll see what I mean by that here as we move along. One thing you would definitely need to have is you're going to need to have a magnetic angle finder. You can get them at Harbor Freight. You can get nicer ones from other shops like the Johnson one here. It's up to you. So I'm going to start off by saying what my transmission is. I know this is redundant, but I got to say it again because people still ask what kind of a manual transmission I used. I'm using a 480 automatic transmission from an 04 Silverado. It has a slip yoke design. Normally, the 480E is pitched downward 3 to 5 degrees. This is done because in a truck, the rear axle is much further down, much lower to the ground than the transmission itself. This is meant for clearance. Well, that's totally not what's going on in a BMW. Also, the Silverado has a live axle, which that's another reason why it's using a slip yoke, is because that axle actually travels up and down with the suspension, which means the yoke slips in and out of the transmission. Also, yeah, some Silverados do use carrier bearings, some don't. So there's that. But then again, we're really not concerned about what the angle was in the Silverado, just letting you know that's kind of what we're working with here. So on the E38, you have a level drive line. The ZF Trans, it's just a straight shot from the ZF Trans to the diff. So that's just a level line that goes across there. In E38, the differential does not move. You have constant velocity joints coming out of the diff on each side, so that's what moves the transmission, but not the diff. And that's why the only reason we're still using a slip yoke here is because we're trying to accommodate the 480 trans. If you get your hands on some other trans, maybe something from Camaro, it doesn't have a slip yoke, then you're kind of staying in theme there. So yeah. So the way I was brought up when I started getting into this is what you would do for a conventional hot rod. You would down pitch the transmission some degrees. You would up pitch the axle and try and get the complementary angles going on there. You don't want to do this in this application. You just want the trans to be level with the axle itself. So it should be a perfect line leaving the trans all the way back to the diff. And I think this little illustration here kind of points out what you want. What you want is the top scenario. Don't try and do anything else. Just shoot for that and you should be okay. But then again, I have to point out, if you're leaving your differential and going straight forward to the transmission, you could see how that dictates where you locate the transmission and the engine in the car. So don't have your mounts built at this point. Like, you should get this angle lined out and just have some blocks of woods under the transmission and the motor. Just kind of, you're still playing around at this point before you set anything in. If you're trying to get it down to the exact degree, perfect everything, because maybe you're starting with a rolling chassis, you don't have the engine and transmission, you're going to need to level the car first. If you're just using jack stands in a garage, that's going to be pretty darn hard to do, pretty much impossible. So what you really want is relative level, and you can do that by just putting the angle finder in your door jambs, or your door sill right at the bottom. Put it on the bumper core support right on the front, if you want to know what it is left to right, and just use something like that, and whatever it is, just write it down. Because in my case, I actually had to move the car in and out a few times from when I started to when I ended. But ideally, you would take all these measurements once you have the car up on jack stands, you have enough room to crawl underneath it and work and do everything. That's kind of the point here. So when you're measuring, and let's say you do have your engine and transmission in the car, before you've removed anything, you've still got your crossmember bolted in, unlike the picture here, and the engine and transmission are resting on their mounts. then you would want to take a measure from the top of the transmission tunnel on down to the center of the output shaft there of your ZF trans. Then you're also going to record what left to right is. Where you measure from, that's up to you. Just remember that remember to use it again the next time you take your measurements, especially when you're trying to locate your 4L80E in here. You know, a lot of drive angle things go on, but if you want to cut out the complications, just record what the ZF trans was pointed at before you take it out, and make sure the 4L80E is doing the same thing when it goes in. That way you preserve the proper line drive angles that BMW put in place, and the complications, kind of fall away at that point. So, but remember to write this down and get it done before you start pulling everything out of the car. So also, you need to measure the angle of the output shaft of your transmission. In theory, it should be 0, but maybe it's 1 or 2 degrees off. You never know. I didn't write all this stuff down. I was just going by what was in the shop that day. In fact, I've done this on a couple other swaps, so this entire process took me all of about, about like a few hours to set it all up, so it wasn't a problem. But make sure that you measure what the ZF trans was before you take it out, and make sure the 4L80 is the same as what that is when it goes in. So there's that. So this is the cross member that's coming out of your E38. It's really close actually to the 4L80E trans. The only problem I had was that you would need a super thin mount. It was so close, but I wish I could have saved it and used it, but there just wouldn't have been enough room for a mount. So there's that. So I went ahead and just lopped off the end piece. I mean, not lopped off the end pieces, but I replicated the ends of this cross member in steel. And that was what I used later on when I built my mount up. So, and this is actually what the mount ended up looking like. Those end plates, I just, I used a piece of cardboard. I made it just like these ends, and then I just made 2 end pieces that looked the same, bolted them in the car, and then just took a piece of steel and laid it right across there and just welded it and tacked all that in place and got all that done when I was dialing in the location of my transmission. And that's all there was to it. You can even see the U-joint there where it's going back into the drive shaft. That's the only, what you're seeing there is actually the only modification point to the drive shaft as well. So about making the drive shaft, I use Republic Diesel. They're a local outfit. Well, at least we have one in our location, and they're a good shop, but they didn't have the equipment to balance the drive shaft after it was complete. There are some shops out there online that will do it for you. I was just in a hurry, wanted to get it done, and I know how to field balance a drive shaft, which is a little bit of a skill. So if you don't know how to do that, that's fine. The key thing I can't stress enough is don't try and weld this in your own garage. That's a very bad idea. You're more than likely going to get it wrong. Let the pros do it on a machine. They have gauges. They can do this down to the thousandths of an inch and get everything dialed in. The last thing you want is a driveline vibration, an incurable one at that. And also, you're going to want to use the slip yoke and U-joints from your 4L80E swap. When you get that in from the junkyard, just ask them to give you, I don't know, 6 inches of the drive shaft with the yoke, just plugged into the trans. They can lop it off after 6 inches. You don't need 6 inches, but it just makes sure they don't go in there and destroy the joint itself. So there's that. Let's see here. So this is what it takes to get the length right on your drive shaft. So you're going to be under the car's going to be up on jack stands when you do this. Whether or not you have the back wheels off the ground it's nice to have, but you don't have to have it because, again, this is a fixed diff where how much suspension compression you have means nothing here. It's really about, is the transmission resting on what it should be resting on? So with this here, you're going to install the 4L80E yoke into the trans. You would do this with the U-joint still installed, and you slide that into the trans and then back it out 3/4 of an inch. The reason you're doing this is not because you're trying to get some kind of proper clearance. It's because in the future, if you want to remove your differential, that 3/4 inch slip in the joint there will allow you to press the to pry the constant velocity joint away from the differential area to drop it down. That's the only reason I even did it. That's it. And then after you've done that, so you slip that U-joint in, back it out 3/4 of an inch, make sure your E38 drive shaft's installed, and then with the two overlapping, do your best job to measure from center of U-joint to center of U-joint, just like in the picture here. You can be a 1/4 inch off, that's fine. Like I said, I did the 3/4 inch back out of the yoke because I'm just doing it to make maintenance easier on myself in the future. And that's it. This is the dimension you will give to the drive shaft shop when you drop off the pieces of your drive shaft and tell them this is what you're trying to do. So that's it. So a couple closing notes here. Go ahead and change out your carrier bearing if it's not new. When you do this, they fail on the E38s a lot, and you're about to add more power to E38, which means it's going to be seeing even more stress. So go ahead and take care of it. If you unbolt the two heads of the drive shaft, go ahead and mark them because the BMW drive shaft can be unbolted apart. Go ahead and mark them deep because they like when the drive shaft shop is done, they love to just paint the heck out of them, and your mark may not be visible. So make sure it's something you think you might be able to pick out even under a couple layers of paint. And that way you can bolt your drive shaft back together the way it came from BMW, which means you preserve the balance from BMW. But if you forget to do this, maybe you're in a hurry, just remember that the two yokes that you have here, let's see, the yoke here and the yoke here, these need to be 180 degrees offset from one another. So like how you see this little ear here, that should be on top up here, 180 degrees off from that guy. Or I guess I better amend what I'm saying here, probably say it's actually 90 degrees because, yeah, 180 would put it on the other side. So they should be 90 degrees off from each other right there. So yeah, that's it.